The jet touched down at 7:42 on a cold Saturday morning, and the entire neighborhood seemed to hold its breath. Behind the glass walls of the small school cafeteria, a little boy named Kian stood frozen, clutching a paper certificate in both hands. His mother had just laughed in his face. She had looked at his father, Arman, with the same cold expression she had worn during their divorce and said the words that would haunt him for years: "Single fathers are always failures." But then the roar of twin engines rolled across the school grounds, growing louder until every child rushed toward the windows. A sleek private jet descended onto the nearby private airstrip, its silver body flashing beneath the bright morning sun. Kian looked at his father in confusion. Arman simply stared at the aircraft, tears quietly gathering in his tired eyes. Because that jet wasn't just arriving to take him somewhere. It was arriving to reveal a truth his ex-wife had never known. And if you believe kindness deserves a second chance, please like this video, share it with someone who needs hope, leave a comment, and subscribe to Hardworking Dad. Sometimes, the person everyone underestimates is the one carrying the biggest story. 3 years earlier, Arman had not owned a private jet, a company, or even a decent pair of shoes. He had owned a small rented apartment above a mechanic's shop, an aging kitchen table, and one precious reason to keep getting out of bed every morning: his 6-year-old son, Kian. When Arman's marriage to Soraya collapsed, she had taken almost everything except the one thing she had never wanted to carry alone: the responsibility of raising their son. She told everyone that Arman was irresponsible, unlucky, and incapable of building a future. What people didn't see was the reality behind those accusations. Arman woke before sunrise every morning, packed Kian's lunch, helped him get dressed, walked him to school, worked construction jobs during the day, delivered food in the evenings, and returned home long after sunset with aching shoulders and barely enough energy to stand. Yet somehow, he still sat beside Kian every night to listen to his stories about school, his dreams of becoming an astronaut, and his endless questions about why the moon followed their car. Arman never complained. He had learned that children remembered presents more than possessions. When Kian's old shoes developed a hole, Arman repaired them instead of buying new ones. When the boy wanted to enter the school science competition, Arman stayed awake for 3 nights helping him build a model rocket from cardboard, plastic bottles, and discarded wires. When Kian became sick, Arman sat beside his bed until morning, whispering that everything would be okay even though he was terrified himself. His own life seemed to shrink around his son's needs, but Arman didn't consider that a sacrifice. He considered it fatherhood. Soraya, however, saw only what he didn't have. She remarried a wealthy businessman named Varek, moved into a gated mansion, and began appearing at school events in expensive clothes while Arman arrived in dusty work boots. At first, Kian was too young to understand the difference. But children notice everything. He noticed how his classmates talked about their mother's vacations and new cars. He noticed that Soraya sometimes arrived in a chauffeur-driven vehicle while his father came straight from work. He noticed that his father ate smaller portions so Kian could have more. And one afternoon, after hearing 2 boys laugh about his father's old truck, Kian asked Arman whether they were poor. Arman looked at him for a long moment and smiled. He told him that money could buy a big house, but it couldn't buy the feeling of being safe in someone's arms. Kian didn't completely understand, but he hugged his father anyway. The turning point came when Arman's construction company unexpectedly shut down. Overnight, he lost his only stable income. His savings disappeared within weeks, and the landlord began leaving notices beneath the apartment door. Arman took whatever work he could find, but nothing was enough. One evening, after Kian fell asleep, Arman sat alone at the kitchen table beneath the weak yellow light and calculated the bills. Rent. Food. School fees. Electricity. Medicine. The numbers kept growing while the money kept shrinking. For the first time in years, Arman allowed himself to cry. He covered his face with both hands and silently promised that Kian would never see him break. But Kian did see him. The little boy walked into the kitchen and wrapped his arms around his father's shoulders. He didn't ask about money. He didn't ask why his father was crying. He simply said that he loved him. That sentence became the fuel Arman needed. The next morning, he began studying something he had secretly been interested in for years: logistics technology. He had always been good at solving problems on construction sites, finding faster routes, reducing waste, and organizing teams. He started developing a simple software idea that could help small transportation companies plan deliveries more efficiently. He worked on it whenever Kian slept, sometimes until 2 or 3 in the morning, typing on a second-hand laptop with a cracked screen. Months passed. Nobody believed in the idea. Friends told him to get a real job. Soraya told him he was wasting time chasing fantasies. Even Varek once laughed and suggested that Arman focus on paying child support instead of pretending he was an entrepreneur. Arman swallowed the humiliation and kept working. Then one afternoon, a small transportation company agreed to test his software. Within 6 weeks, their fuel costs dropped dramatically. Another company called. Then another. Investors began asking questions. Arman was suddenly working longer hours than ever, but this time he wasn't working just to survive. He was building something. His company grew quietly. He refused expensive offices at first and kept the team small. He remembered what it felt like to have nothing, so he treated his employees with patience. He gave bonuses when projects succeeded and helped workers who were struggling at home. When one employee needed time off to care for his sick daughter, Arman told him not to worry about work. He knew what it meant to choose between earning money and being there for your child. Within 2 years, the little software company had become a major logistics technology firm operating across several countries. Arman still drove an ordinary car. He still packed Kian's lunch. He still attended every parent-teacher meeting. The only thing that had changed was that he no longer worried about whether the electricity would be shut off. Then came the school award ceremony. Kian had been selected for a national young inventor competition after his science project, inspired by the cardboard rocket his father had helped him build years earlier, caught the attention of the judges. Arman was unbelievably proud. He took the morning off and wore the only formal suit he owned. Soraya arrived with Varek and immediately began talking about how important appearances were. When she saw Arman, she smirked and whispered something to Varek. Later, in front of several parents, she told Arman that Kian needed a more successful role model. She reminded him of the years when he had struggled and told him that being a single father had made him weak. Then she said the cruel sentence that silenced everyone nearby: single fathers are always failures. Arman didn't defend himself. He looked at Kian instead. The boy's eyes were filling with tears. Arman walked over, knelt down, and told his son that nothing anyone said could change the truth that he was proud of him. Kian held his father's hand as they walked toward the stage. But before the ceremony could begin, the distant sound of engines shook the windows. Everyone turned toward the sky. The private jet landed on the airstrip beside the school. A moment later, 2 company executives stepped out, followed by a group of journalists and investors. The school's principal hurried outside, confused. Arman remained still until one of the executives approached him and handed him a folder. Inside was the final approval for his company to complete a massive international acquisition that would make his business one of the fastest-growing logistics technology companies in the region. The room went silent. Soraya stared at him as if she were seeing a stranger. Varek's face lost its confidence. Arman could have humiliated them. He could have reminded everyone of every insult, every accusation, every moment they had looked down on him. Instead, he simply smiled and walked toward Kian. When his son received the award, Arman stood at the back of the room and applauded harder than anyone. Afterward, Soraya approached him. Her voice was quieter now. She admitted that she had judged him by what she could see rather than by what he was building. She apologized for the words she had spoken and said she wanted a better relationship with Kian. Arman listened without anger. He told her that forgiveness didn't erase the past, but people deserved the chance to become better than the worst things they had done. He agreed that Kian deserved a healthy relationship with both parents, as long as that relationship was built on respect and honesty. Then Arman turned toward his son. Kian was holding his trophy against his chest, smiling through tears. Arman knelt beside him and said that the private jet, the company, and the money were never the greatest things he had achieved. His greatest achievement was becoming the father Kian needed when life was at its hardest. Kian hugged him tightly and whispered that he didn't care about the jet. He just wanted his dad to stay for lunch. So Arman stayed. The jet waited outside beneath the bright afternoon sky, surrounded by people who wanted his attention, but Arman sat at a small cafeteria table with his son, eating sandwiches and listening to Kian explain every detail of his science project. For years, people had measured Arman's success by his bank account, his clothes, his car, and eventually his private jet. But the truth was much simpler. Success had been waking up every morning when giving up would have been easier. Success had been choosing kindness when bitterness was justified. Success had been showing up for a child who needed one person in the world who would never leave. If this story touched your heart, please like the video, share it with someone who might need a reminder that struggles do not define a person, and subscribe to Hard Working Dad for more stories about courage, family, kindness, and second chances. And before the story ends, I have one special request. Comment, "A father who never gave up," below if you believe that a parent's greatest wealth is the love they give their children. That evening, as the sun began to set, Kian looked through the cafeteria window and saw the private jet preparing to leave. He asked his father if they were really going to fly in it someday. Arman smiled and told him that they could, but only when Kian was ready. The boy thought for a moment and said he would rather ride in his father's old truck again because that was where all his favorite memories had happened. Arman laughed, pulled his son close, and looked toward the fading daylight. The world had finally given him everything it once said he could never have. But sitting there with his son's head resting against his shoulder, he realized something more valuable than money could ever buy: he had not failed. He had survived. He had loved. He had stayed. And sometimes, the greatest victory in a father's life isn't the moment the world finally sees his success. It's the quiet moment when his child looks at him and knows, without a doubt, that dad never gave up.